Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. The surge in cyber attacks experienced by the industrial sector has been credited to a number of issues, ranging from outdated security software to lagging protocols surrounding data access and storage. But according to today's guest, one of the main reasons we've seen an uptick in these attacks could simply be because they're more profitable. Joel Burleson Davis is the CTO of SecureLink, a leading provider of secure access management solutions. He notes that in addition to manufacturing being the second most targeted sector, it offers the largest average payout for ransomware attacks. So the industrial sector now faces the multi-faceted realities of attacks that are more complex, Russian hackers more emboldened by the Ukrainian conflict, and a greater number of vulnerabilities stemming from an uptick in connected devices throughout manufacturing. Here to discuss all that is Joel. Thanks for joining us today. Joel, we've heard so much about all this uptick in cyber security concerns for the industrial sector, increase in attacks, particularly on the ransomware side. From your perspective, what is making manufacturing such an appealing target for all these bad actors?
Number one, it's really disruptive, right? And so you're going to, the likelihood of getting a payout or doing some real damage or sort of getting your way is really high, right? Like when you shut down a pipeline, and gas stops flowing, like you make your message pretty clear, right? So sort of the visibility and the impact and sort of, that sort of splash that you can make with, hitting critical infrastructures is a pretty big deal. Especially if these ransomware gangs are, trying to get money, out of folks, that's a really good way, to sort of make your presence known. So, the sort of impact of visibility or the optics of it is one. The second is just the sort of state of current, operational technology in general. Like any industry, as you go through sort of digital or technological change, you're going to have legacy stuff. You're going to have gaps. You're going to, not have all of your, pieces in order. And so as these, critical infrastructure like this is open to, connectivity, and it was never meant to be open for, broad connectivity, the sort of the attack surface of the entire sort of industry has just exploded. And, teams are doing a really good job of trying to close those gaps and do what they can. But, with the attack surface kind of like exponentially growing, it makes it really easy, if like someone accidentally opens up, a PLC that, was on an internal network for the last 20 years, never had any expectation of getting connected to the internet, suddenly is, that's really easy to get into. So it would have been nice if, manufacturing or critical infrastructure could have like completely updated every single thing that ever existed in all of their factories and, what the capital expenditure there would look like before they then connected to the internet or something like that. But, we live in the real world, and so that can't happen.
No, it makes sense. And we've heard some of that before. And you're right, having that type of hindsight would be pretty amazing. Awesome. Look at things right now. Again, ransomware, as you alluded to, is a huge concern specific to the industrial sector. Are there any groups that you're seeing that are playing a more pivotal role or really making themselves more known than others?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few groups, but just the industry in general, because there have been successful ransomware attacks, and there's been payouts to groups like that. Ideally, we would never pay them at all, right? There would never be a payoff, and so anybody even interested in getting into the game there'd be no reason for them, but people do, right? They like have to get their businesses up and going. But it ends up in sort of a tragedy of the commons scenario, right? Like, it's like ideally no one would ever pay a ransomware gang. And then that sort of like, malicious behavior would just like disappear, just go extinct because there's no benefit to it. But then you get hit, like your factory gets hit or your pipeline gets hit and you go, well, no one should, but we're going to, because this is really painful for us, and then more and more people make that same decision. And then now you've got this like, underground industry that's really lucrative, right? And so then you're funding, those groups, right? So they're like, there's a number of like very prominent like Russian hacker groups and stuff like that, like Conti and stuff like that. But you're also incentivizing new players to join the space, right? Because there's funding there. There's going to be payoff, and so the space in general is just growing because they've been successful. And so it's a really hard scenario to be in, especially when you're the one feeling the pain. It makes sense that you're like, yeah, like I know, like conceptually, maybe ethically, that I should not pay this ransomware, but I can like solve my pain right now if I do. And so it's sort of that continued success, and that sort of decision making has, I think, just made that whole sort of underground industry just blossom.
Absolutely. Do any of these ransomware players have sort of their signature move or anything like that? Can you tell sort of by the tactics where it's coming from at all, or are they kind of similar in nature?
I mean, they probably do, right? If you probably analyze, you pick up the signature. It's like, oh, these are, X, Y, or Z person. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between them. And they're all going to have different motivations, right? So you have, your sort of state level actors doing something like they did with SolarWinds, where they're trying to infiltrate just so they can, have sort of a sleeper breach that they can activate at some time to create some pain somewhere.
Sure.
And then you're going to have other ones that are showing up and they're hitting hard and fast and they're just trying to get sort of their payoff and things like that. So, one of the things that's really sort of good to look at, like as you see these breaches happen, you look at what ransomware, what they're sort of getting out of it is, what that sort of mix is between like, players in it just because it's a quick buck, or it's a quick lot of money, or if it's going to be sort of the, even more nefarious sort of state level actor that's just trying to infiltrate so that they can create like wide scale or large scale pain. And so, as we, sort of look at, the, ransomware groups that are, active, it's like, what is that sort of mix going there? And when it's the state level actor to cause widespread pain scenario, that gets me very nervous, right?
Yeah.
The other's just sort of business. You can, you can sort of deal with it the same way, right? If the market goes away, those actors will go away, but when you're talking about sort of state level threats, they won't, right? They're in it for a different reason.
No, that's an interesting distinction to make. It's a great point. We talk a lot about these attacks are going to happen. We talk a lot about the things that we can do to defend ourselves from those attacks, but inevitably they may happen anyway, regardless of our best efforts. When you think about a response plan for manufacturers to have, what do you see as some of the key components to be ready with in responding to these types of attacks?
Yeah, I mean, number one, like having the capacity or the resources to respond, right? Like, if you're understaffed or you don't have a third party or like someone else that's going to help you do your instant response, even detecting a breach, if you don't have the resources to actually respond or plan for any of those incident response, it'll be nice for you to know that you're about to go down, but if you don't have the resources to prevent it or recover from it, that knowledge is super useful because you won't actually be able to dig yourself out of that. If you do have those resources, so we can start there, right? If you don't have resource constraint, which ideally you don't, around the sort of skills and capabilities you need to respond to something like that, then it's you sort of need to have a plan. And it's particularly useful to sort of inventory your most critical assets, right? Sort of like the crown jewels of your enterprise. Because if you inventory those and you can work, from those back. So if something like this happens, ideally they never get to the crown jewels, right? Ideally they never get to something that, if they have control of it, is so painful to your business that you're going to want to then, pay up, right? And so, that's the next plan. So you're like, hey, I need to start remediating or protecting. Let's start at sort of the crown jewel scenario, and work our way out from there. But like day one, or, if you're just start thinking about starting a program, like that's sort of where you start. It's like, do I have the resources? Do I have a plan? And then, start from those crown jewels and sort of build a security program out from there.
Makes a lot of sense. So we've been talking a lot about the bad guys, Joel. Maybe you can tell us about one of the good guys. Can you talk to us a little bit about the work SecureLink does and some of the folks you work with?
Yeah, totally. So SecureLink, I mean, we've been around for about 18 years, and we've been specializing in sort of critical access management. We've called it a bunch of different things through the years, but that's what we've basically always done. And it really comes to like, hey, where are those soft spots? For us, when we started the company about 18 years ago, it's the third party, it's the supply chain, it's the vendor. In almost any organization, that's your soft spot. And the really interesting thing is that was sort of true 20 years ago, and it's still true today. It's even more true today, right? Like the interconnectedness of, business to business, third party supplier, supply chain. I mean, we've seen supply chain attacks. That continues to be this really soft spot, across industries. Us focusing there, this is sort of going back to that dynamic for the crown jewels. Like, we help, by managing, securing access to critical systems and data. We help very quickly make sure that you can say, hey, I've got my crown jewels protected, and then you can work on the rest of your technology program after that, or your security program.
Makes sense. One of the things that's shaping cybersecurity initiatives as well are things going on in Ukraine right now. In addition to supply chain struggles and just the moral dilemma that it's created, it's also brought to light a lot of cybersecurity tactics that both sides are using as part of the war. What are you seeing coming out of this conflict, and how could it affect U.S. manufacturing from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, so this actually also goes back to sort of the concern about state level actors. I was talking about it, actually before the sort of Ukraine conflict really started, that if the U.S. was to ever, put sanctions on Russia, or the West was to put sanctions on Russia, that's sort of like economic warfare. There's going to be retaliation, and one of the great ways to do retaliation is, breaching security, creating widespread pain by taking over pipelines or factories or plants, and sort of responding with the economic pain they're feeling from sanctions with some economic pain of your own. So sort of tit for tat scenario, and so now that the conflict actually broke out and we're in that, we've done sanctions, we're seeing that exact same thing. It's like new sanction on Russia, they're coming at infrastructure. They're going to want to shut down factories. They're going to want to shut down pipelines. They're going to want to, shut down the industrial sector to hurt us, right? To create some economic pain, in the West.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of there. We've got all of these different converging factors right now. When you look at the industrial sector and trying to be safe from some of these bad actors, ransomware, phishing, you've talked a lot about state-sponsored actors. Putting your prognosticator hat on a little bit, if we look 12, 18 months down the road, what do you think are some of the bigger challenges, obstacles, issues that we're going to be seeing from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, but like the number one thing that we're going to see, more and more, and this is just a pragmatic thing, is that the embrace of zero trust. Like the pain we've seen over the last few years, especially in like supply chain attacks, make it really clear, like the old perimeter doesn't exist, which was in the industrial sector was a real thing. I mean, your perimeter was so solid because you were fully disconnected from, the rest of the world. Now that the old perimeter doesn't exist, there needs to be an embrace of sort of new technologies, in particularly around zero trust. There's been directives, from the federal government about sort of helping embrace zero trust. But I think over particularly the pain we've had, this Ukraine conflict, and so over the next 12 to 18 months, I think most people should and will be sort of racing towards how do I start embracing this zero trust dynamic, because, that old perimeter is just gone.
Sure. I'm glad you brought up zero trust. It's a really interesting topic in and of itself. From your perspective, maybe could you just give us a brief, how you define it, how you look at it, and some of the challenges that you're seeing with the folks you're working with really embracing that strategy?
Yeah, so zero. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, I know there's a sort of semi-official ways to talk about it, but the dynamic is and we've there's a long-standing sort of axiom in security, like least privilege and all that stuff, and it's just taking that even further. At some point in most technology infrastructures, you trust something at some point. The ideal scenario is to not have to do that. There was a movement recently to start talking about identity as the new perimeter, but that's just another element. It's like, hey, how trustworthy what's my confidence level about this identity being the real identity? Even when we started before Zero Trust was a thing, one of the things that SecureLink did, we verified employment. It was really useful. It's like, hey, does this person actually work for, Rockwell? Right? If they don't, they can't get in. Right? It's like, how much do I trust this identity? Like, what's my confidence level of that identity? And it's identity on both sides, right? As well, it's the identity of the machine, the data, right? Understanding what that is, what the sort of surface is for that. Having an inventory of how valuable and what that is, and starting to piece those things together, so you can draw these absolutely fine-grained access into that are time-based as well. Like temporal control is a really important thing. So in our scenario, it's like, hey, this technical services person from Rockwell needs 30 minutes of access into my plant to this one PLC. I'm going to verify their identity, right? And I know that they're only able to connect to that one PLC, and that 30 minutes is gone, right? There's no open access. There's no, dynamic of trusted vendor or trusted third party. Or in a lot of scenarios, there's no idea of like trusted employee or, trusted systems and stuff like that. You start sort of drawing those fine lines between sort of identity and access to a system or data.
So is it that the fact that it's much more rigid, doesn't give as much flexibility from a user's perspective, that really inhibits the implementation of that type of strategy?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Yeah, and so for software providers like SecureLink, one of the big challenges that we have and we'll continue to have to sort of rise to is making that easy, right? Automating a bunch of that, making that sort of simple to adopt. Because if there's a giant amount of friction to adopt, like a zero trust sort of technology, it'll just get either thrown away completely or misused, right? Yeah. So like, that friction to adopt is a real thing. Like there's this like thing that we say, the maximum utility of a system, right, versus its security, they're sort of inversely related. And so like the most secure machine is like turned off, right, in a closet, disconnected from everything. It's not very useful, right? And so, if as you're implementing something like Zero Trust or any of these technologies, that sort of effort or friction to introduce them like massively reduces the utility of the system. Organizations and people and, employees and, contractors, they'll reject it. So the big challenge for, software right now is to reduce that friction sort of adoption so that we can keep building this sort of ecosystem of sort of zero trust.
Thanks, Joel. For more information on the work SecureLink does, you can go to www.securelink.com. Thanks for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. For Joel Burleson Davis, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.